thanks very much for joining us. Absolute pleasure to be here and to be talking to you guys about this kind of new project. So kind of first thing to disclose, we haven't got this nailed yet. You know, this is a pilot project that we're working on, going to share our kind of thoughts, where we're at. We've just started. So I'm really happy for people to kind of ask as many questions. There'll be lots of you on here from different backgrounds and doing different roles. So it's always kind of tricky finding exactly the right kind of tone for these things. And especially when we can't see each other. I can't see who's shaking their head, who's crying, who's sticking their fingers up at me and all that kind of stuff. But just quickly to introduce the project, it's Plymouth Learning Disability and Autism programme have funded this pilot project. Live Well in the southeast have been kind of a major contributor too. We're hoping that Roy DeVoe from Tizard's going to help us with the evaluation piece and also Plymouth University. So without much further ado, as they say, I'll jump in. It's for any of you guys that don't know me, I'm Paddy Behan, co-founding director of PBS UK and co-host of the PBS Matters podcast, if anyone listens to that. But anyway, here we go. So look, first things first. I think that, you know, when we first got the offer of developing some training, me and Tia and the team, we kind of had a real chat about, you know, what would that be? You know, there's plenty of PBS training out there. We do some, there's loads of other organisations that do, and there's the good, the bad and the ugly. But I think a lot of us in the field would agree, and even those of us that have developed our own training, saying that sometimes it's not making enough of a difference to the people that we support, you know. Now, some of you will be kind of shouting at the screen saying, we know that training on its own doesn't change practice, and, you know, we'll explore that for anyone that's not familiar with that as we go through. And time again, I think we're seeing a gap between kind of policy and practice very often. And training has been one of the things that's been kind of used to try and plug that gap between policy and practice. You know, the late, great Jim Mansell used to talk a lot about that gap. And that often there needed to be a gap, but what we needed to get better at was filling it. And as I say, training has been the kind of major attempt to plug that gap. And having delivered a lot of training now, large projects, small projects, in being inside organisations, working as an external consultant, there's no doubt about one of the things that we've seen that makes a difference in terms of outcomes following training. And that's really when there's very deliberate approaches to help staff embed that on a simple level. People that have been talking about this for a long time, such as Roy DeVoe and other folks, will talk about practice leadership as the vehicle for that. So the kind of elephant in the room is there's been challenges for a long time with embedding outcomes from training, and practice leadership is one of the things that can help there. So just quickly, to give you a bit of a definition of practice leadership, DeVoe and McGill, 2019, state that it's been defined and measured as the development and maintenance of good staff support for service users through managers, spending time observing work, providing feedback, modelling good practice and problem solving, and also providing staff with regular one-to-one supervision and team meetings focused on improving service user engagement in meaningful activities and relationships. Kind of simply put, it's about leading and supporting staff to do a good job. Now, it's interesting because that job, I don't think, needs to just rest with the managers. And we've seen a real change in the role of managers with organisations. Managers managing larger patches, supported living managers having kind of multiple schemes and different physical locations to manage. So the conversation has shifted somewhat, I think, to kind of management and leadership within services, and not just managers. And you know, we're really fortunate today that we're going to hear from Michael West later on today about compassionate and collective leadership. But essentially, like I say, when you think about practice leadership, it's what support is currently going on for staff to do a good job. I just wanted to give you a very quick example. What I can be terrible at is going through all the rhetoric and not giving specific examples. So I'm just going to run through one that I've developed as part of this training. And well, I say developed, this is one that we're involved with, I should say. So just to give you a quick, for anyone that's not familiar with it, what this might look like, or what it can look like, simply. We're working in a service one point in time, and forgive the kind of reference, but just for ease, that the staff team was seeing this young man as a bit of an ogre. You know, they were just seeing the difficult behaviours that he presented, and he was kind of lost. He lived in a flat on his own, which again, when we think about that magnifies that staff experience. If they're involved in difficult experiences, it's completely magnified when you're in that kind of single service and you're on your own, and the staff team are going through in that into that setting every day. So again, this isn't about here kind of bad staff, good staff, etc. This is just a bit of background on the story. So essentially what happened really is what I call the emotional piggy bank was completely depleted. You know, there was very little rapport between this young man and his staff team, very little examples of that. The staff team were burnt out. And as I say, those difficult behaviours had completely stolen all the oxygen out of the room, all the bandwidth for people. So what did we do? We got together with the team. And that's a really important fundamental aspect of kind of practice leadership. You know, we talk about kind of top down, bottom up approaches, etc., etc. Practice leadership should be a collective approach. It should be have equal input from those that are responsible for the direct care and support of folks as it is from anybody else. So what did we do? Well, the first thing that we needed to find out was what does he like? And again, I'm going to explain in a minute, but the focus on quality of life has to be the paramount consideration when it comes to practice leadership. So some of the things that we found out that he liked: not oranges, but anything that was orange. Okay. And we're speaking to staff that literally anything that's orange. Okay. He liked music and he really liked swimming. All right. Now, none of these things were really happening, but those are the things that people said that he liked. I'm giving you a very abridged version. So he hadn't gone swimming in a long time, even though people were reliably saying that was his favourite activity. So we took some of these ideas, and the first thing that we needed to do was lead by example. Go and spend some time with this young chap. Now, look, I don't like getting hit as much as anybody else does, you know, and we need to be really careful about that kind of stuff, because practice leadership is about people engaging in similar practices to you. I don't want to put anyone else at risk as much as I don't want to put myself at risk. Going out that evening, we were staying away, working away, and going and buying anything orange that we could get from Toys R Us, sensory items, all sorts of different items and all that kind of stuff. Now, this shows that he really liked some of the orange sensory toys. He absolutely loved orange kinetic sand for some reason, just really enjoyed playing with that. And we also put some drum and bass music on with the coloured water speakers, and he absolutely loved that. Now, very abridged version, but that enabled us to start developing rapport with this young lad and allow us to spend some time with him. Slowly, as we got a couple of other members of the staff team to do that, that kind of confidence grew, and then we were able to start going swimming again. So the focus for this lad, even though there were those difficult behaviours there, was that kind of real focus on quality of life, very gently, and it was about getting the next one or two people on board before we could start moving towards those real kind of quality of life things for him. At that point in time, again, then what we see, he starts going out swimming, people get the opportunity to spend good time together, develop that rapport, and the perception of this young man then started to change. Okay. So that's just a very brief example, but coming back to why would you want to implement a practice leadership approach? Well, research has shown that working with effective practice leaders will link to high levels of job satisfaction for staff and better role clarity. And we know that if you looked at any of the work of Dr. Peter Baker and Nick Gore, that role clarity is a really important aspect around staff wellbeing. Do people know what's expected of them? Do they know what they need to do? Really important. The next point there about within active support, that practice leadership enabled better implementation of active support, i.e. engagement was higher. Now, I'm making a leap here, but I think that you could apply that to anything. You know, when practice leadership is better, whatever it is you're going to try and implement, whatever training staff have been on, whatever approaches you are trying to, or cultural aspects you're trying to embed, practice leadership is going to help you do that. So it's about supporting staff to embed specific approaches. And then finally, practice leadership management style promotes better staff experiences when working in challenging environments. And again, that couldn't be more important at this point in time when we have the staff in crisis. You know, what we really need to do is provide a better experience for staff, I think, to hold on to the good ones that we have and to make our line of work as attractive as it should be, because it's an amazing line of work. Some core domains of practice leadership then. When you go through the research and literature, there are three things that kind of come as kind of core domains. One, that is a focus on quality of life. That's absolutely paramount. And I'll come to that a little bit later, because it's so easy. If you work in services where there are behaviours that are described as difficult or challenging, that steals all the oxygen out of a room very often, just like the example that we'd given you before. So we have to have that kind of unrelenting focus on quality of life. It sounds simple, and a lot of people engage in the rhetoric, but it takes a discipline when working in services to try and do that. Yeah. Developing staff practice. Look, again, we know there's evidence again, time and time again in research, that just classroom-based training on its own is not a good way of developing staff practice. Yet, it is still a model that is used predominantly within services, and millions of pounds are invested in it. One of the things that we'll be putting forward in this, and that this project is about how do we change that? What do we need to put in place to help develop that staff practice? Some of you guys will see, some of you behaviour analysts, if there are any out there, you'll see the similarities with behaviour skills training. We know there are approaches out there that are useful for it. And the other thing about developing staff practice as well is really key about how do we engage staff, you know, developing staff practice so staff don't feel done to, that we engage staff in the process of developing practice. And very often, if you speak to someone like Roy DeVoe, he'll talk about that tacit knowledge in staff teams. Very often staff don't need training on certain aspects of how to support people well. What we need to do is figure out how to distribute that good practice amongst the staff team. And then finally, what's really key in ensuring that practice leadership is embedded is that organisational context. So that's really about a systematic approach, ensuring that this is in policies and practices, and that there's senior management support for this. Just by way of an example, as a kind of to show what happens when that's perhaps not in place, is that the young lad that we spoke about in the previous example, after that period of work, he got back swimming. Now there's a bunch of different reasons for this, but because that didn't become systemic, it didn't become part of the organisational context, within a 3-6 month period, things went exactly back to where they were for him, exactly back to where they were for him. So again, it's so important that we look at that organisational context. Just to touch on that organisational context then, looking at some of the work of Roy DeVoe, and Roy will talk very clearly about the distinction between management and leadership. And leadership really being the exercise of social influence. Who's leading the dance? Who are staff following? And the process of management being much more about monitoring and scheduling of resources. Now, look, there's a lot more to it than that. I'm not saying there isn't. But the point here being is that leadership being that exercise of social influence. Yeah, you can be a great leader and not a very good manager. And if I'm being hands up, I think I'm more down that end of the spectrum. You can also be a great manager and perhaps not a great leader. There are some people that are amazing and that can do both, but they're different skill sets. Okay. So when we start to unpack organisational culture too, so like I said, first thing to be clear, management and leadership are different. You need both. You can have a great manager that meets all the CQC regulations, but perhaps isn't great at the exercise of social influence, getting other members of that team on board to engage in those specific practices. We just need to look at the terrible abuse scandals to understand the powerful influence of social influence, you know. Winterbourne being a clear and obvious one, Wayne was a good leader because people were following, they were engaging in the specifics of his practice. He was a leader on terrible practice, but nevertheless was influential within that staff team. 2, organisational cultures. So that organisational context. And that really is, when we look at culture, it's the way that things are done around here. And there's lots of information about how to support people to engage in the specifics of certain behaviours. But the other thing that's really key for a practice leadership culture is that bottom-up approach. It's those kind of pro-social approaches where people are involved in the development of setting goals and standards for people, but also involved in reviewing it. As I said, we're privileged here today, I think, personally, because I'm very familiar with his work, but Michael West's work on kind of compassionate leadership. And one of the aspects that I find particularly interesting is collective leadership, getting teams together to establish what goals you're working on. And that's a really key aspect within culture that's going to support the implementation of practice leadership. And then practice leadership and management. Again, you need good management in place to support good practice leadership. One of the papers from Roy, there's a line in it that just jumps out at me, and I've got it here, forgive me for reading. It says, practice leadership was only effective in the presence of good general management. So we have to create the opportunity for our leaders to have that social influence within teams, and that could be supervisions, it could be supernumerary time, it could be all sorts of aspects. But again, we can't just hope that practice leadership is going to happen amongst bad management. Might do, but it's very unlikely. Okay, I'll just briefly jump onto this because I don't want to take too much time. One of the things that we want to do is dispel the myth that leaders are around kind of charismatic, dynamic, any of that kind of gumph. You know, we have a joke in PBS UK that there's enough jazz hands in PBS UK with me. I can do all the shouting and going and chatting to everybody and all that kind of stuff. Doesn't mean you're a good leader. And it's a mistake to identify those folks always as good leaders. The things that we need to look at is, do you have the technical skills? And very simply put, are you a good support worker? You know, can you support people well? Those are some of the technical skills. Also, what we need to help develop people is some of the stuff we'll talk about through the course, but essentially, can you provide good support to the people that you do? Second is kind of people skills. I really like the work of Simon Sinek here. He talks about these are not soft skills. You know, they are not secondary skills. Are you able to get on with people? Are you able to influence a team? And all of those kind of things. And those are some of the things that we need to get better at looking at with our leaders. And then thirdly, we've got the contextual skills, what we call contextual skills. And again, really, those contextual skills are about, can you understand how to operate in the complex environments that we do? Making sense of kind of complex situations and understanding when to push through with goals and actually when to back off. And I think that particularly now, that's more relevant than it's ever been with some of the challenges that we face. So as well as wanting those technical skills and people skills, we want people that have those kind of contextual skills and that are able to kind of evaluate a range of different things. And particularly where we're going to go with this, it's about who do you target next for the development of the specific practice? And I'll explain that as we go through. So we've borrowed some of the work from United Response. There's a freely accessible brochure on their website. It's fantastic. So all credit goes to them with these domains. I've collapsed the final one. But essentially, the key components of practice leadership. One, there's that focus on quality of life. Two is about allocating and organising staff to deliver support when and how service users want and need it. Three is coaching staff to deliver better support by spending time with them, providing feedback, modelling good practice. And four is about reviewing. Now, again, the document that we're taking this from will talk about reviewing in one-to-ones and reviewing in staff team meetings too, but we've just collapsed that into reviewing for now. This is what we have built this course on. These four key areas, and what we wanted to look to do was to develop a framework to support staff to work within. So these key areas, and like I say, we'll break that down as we go through. Just a very quick nod to the challenges that we've seen previously. Some of you guys on this call will be familiar with what's known as the Haciotis Study. And the reason that I've got that up there is that this was a project that cost a lot of money. There's a lot of money invested in it, so that wasn't the problem. And the conclusion that you might be able to see down there is that it made almost no difference at all whatsoever. Now, I'm not going to get into the debate around kind of why that was, but again, it's just another demonstration that a very well financed project made no difference to most importantly to the people that we support, but also very little difference in perception of the staff that went through it. Anne McDonald gave a fantastic commentary on this and looked at some of the research around embedding positive behaviour support, and a couple of the quotes that we pulled out that have influenced the development of this course. PBS is a service system that requires good management within human services in order to be successfully implemented. So again, let's look at that system before we try implementing new approaches. Building PBS capacity at an organisational level is essential, and PBS training should address capacity building, resulting in systems change, not just change for the individual. Again, this course that we're developing shouldn't just be about the end outcomes for the people that we support. That's the goal. But we need to be clear about the measures that we need to put in place that are predictive of the likelihood of achieving that outcome or not. Build the organisational capacity. And then another quote was that we shouldn't be merely teaching a list of intervention techniques, but supporting trainees to use interventions within systems and to integrate these within broader infrastructures and networks in order to have the maximum impact on practice. All of your contexts are going to be nuanced. They've got different things, there's competing demands, all that kind of stuff. So it's really important that candidates on any course like this learn how to embed those principles back at their organisation. And it's really important that courses look at the kind of nuances around that and support candidates to learn how to do that back at their place. So quickly, in terms of kind of looking at our idea, what are we looking to do? Well, there's a very basic principles for this. And we think that staff will do a better job if they know exactly what's expected of them, and also if what they do is recognised and supported. Quite simply. So we've gone to length to try not to make this an overly academic course. You know, the research is already out there. If people want that stuff, they can go and grab it. But it's a contact sport. It's a practical experience, and that's what we wanted to provide it. So as mentioned, we wanted to provide that kind of framework for staff to be able to take this model of practice leadership and apply it back in their workplace. But we also wanted to provide stuff that still had that flexibility. So we've got a bunch of tools and resources that we're going to support people to use. We've got a workbook, but if people have got their own stuff in place, that's fantastic, and they can use that as they go through the course. But also it still provides the flexibility for teams to set the goals. And I think that that's one of the absolutely key things in the development of this program. We all know, right, watching Leah's presentation this morning, we need to stop with the training programs where we hope that if we just tell people what to do, they're going to go and do it. That is not what happens. So we need to develop programs that support the development of that learning and that support people to embed this stuff back within their service. So the training, what we're looking to develop is to support people to use in a variety of contexts over a period of time, and to intersperse teaching with supported application via a longitudinal training format. And we combine that with periods of practice in the service setting and supported by coaching and mentoring. It's perfect. I love it when someone else has done the work for you. So Anderson and colleagues had kind of already raised this, and it's perfect. Just what I was trying to articulate. So that's been a real heavy influence in how we've developed this course, but we've also had a heavy influence on that senior leader buy-in too. And like I say, I'll explain as we kind of go through. So the model that we're essentially using is, and I actually try and stay away from calling someone a practice leader, but for the purposes of this presentation, we will. So we're essentially going to coach the practice leader, and they're going to participate in the plan development, and we're originally going to go and coach the rest of the core team. So the core team is just a small group of people that we can focus on testing whatever that action plan is to see if it's going to work. No point trying to train a whole staff team unless we've got some feedback and evidence that this is actually going to be effective for this person and that it works. Those folks were then going to go and coach other members of the team. So we're going to coach somebody in these specific approaches. They would then go and coach a member of the core team. Then that member of the core team would then go and coach someone from the existing team. So a very filtered system, carefully managed. Originally, we'd wanted to coach kind of 3 core team members, and they would all go off and coach 3 other people within their staff team. As I said, contextual skills are a really important aspect for a practice leader. I'm sure this might make some of you guys smile, but any of you guys got problems with having too many staff around at the minute? No, I didn't think so. Yeah, it's tricky. So to get 3 members of staff off rota, doing something new was just, we know it's going to be impossible at this point in time, and it's not realistic, and yeah, was going to be a problem for people. So contextually, we've reduced that. We're just getting 1 person to focus on the next person, and then they are going to train the next person. So hopefully we've tried to make it much more manageable for people. These are those key components again, and I'm just going to give you the very specific approaches that we're taking to help people focus on this. So the focus on quality of life, we're using the Perma model. So we are supporting staff to go through and develop a Perma profile for somebody that they work with. I'll give you a brief run through of what the Perma profile is if you're not familiar with it in a bit. In terms of allocating and organising staff, well, really that's about our staff clear what's expected of them, particularly in this context. So we're working with candidates to make sure that we select and set very clear goals, and that there's a very clear action plan, a clear and measurable action plan. Next, about coaching, we're using Roy DeVoe's EDDI model. And again, I'm going to break that down and explain to you. Like I said, there's a bunch of different ways you can do this, but we wanted to select something to be clear for candidates, to reduce that response effort, if you like, to give candidates the best opportunity of getting through this. And then with regards to reviewing, we've chosen a tried and tested methodology for us as an organisation, which is practice workshops. And that's, again, it's about getting people together to discuss whatever your current goal is. So we've used that extensively in terms of reducing restrictive practices in organisations, but we are now applying that methodology to see if we can improve goal attainment for the folks that we support. So just a quick run through of those things that we've discussed there. The Perma model to help people focus on quality of life. Excuse me. And if you're not familiar with that Perma model, I'll just give you a very quick rundown. So it's from Martin Seligman, comes from the field of positive psychology. And I'm always careful when I put that next bit up, because I know not all clinical psychologists are obsessed with illness and disorder and all that kind of stuff. There are some great happy ones out there as well. But as a field, perhaps we've been too focused on the negative, the difficult behaviours and all that kind of stuff. So we really need to support teams to focus in on those quality of life aspects. And again, even at the start of this course, we've done a fair bit of work using the Perma model. When you sit down with teams and start discussing goals, it very quickly moves towards what people want to change about that individual, or what they want to see them doing less. So it does, we need to support teams to have a vehicle to put the quality of life stuff front and center in those discussions. And the Perma model does that for us. So that Perma model, the acronym stands for P is positive emotion. So what is it that gives that person positive emotion? What does that look like? The E is engagement. What do people like to do? What gives them a sense of flow? What do they get absorbed by? You just heard a great presentation by Lizzie about her experience as an autistic adult, and talking about, I made some notes. She said, indulge people with their special interests. She said, it does wonders for my self-esteem to let people go and spend time on their special interests. The R is about relationships. So again, we often characterize that as rapport. What's the best way to build rapport with this individual? And quite often, if you're working with people whose behaviour is described as challenging, that rapport can be quite damaged, because most of the attending that we provide to people comes contingent on those behaviours that are described as challenging. So we're just trying to reframe that. The M is meaning, and that is where people get a sense of belonging from, a sense of purpose, a sense of value, if you like. And then finally, the A is accomplishment. So where do people get that sense of accomplishment from, a sense of achievement? And so we take people through a Perma profile and we ask them what this means for those individuals, and then to be clear about how they might improve that for that individual. So it just really gets that focus on quality of life. And again, really important to note that improving people's well-being is just good for their overall health as well as this project. The allocating and organising aspect, the next key component. So once we've got that information around what improves quality of life for people, what we really want to try and do is develop discipline within the system to get people to focus on something, focus on one thing. What's the most important thing for this person that's going to improve their well-being? And working with teams to help establish SMART goals. I don't know if you experienced this, but I think a lot of us in health and social care, we've got great ideas, but perhaps we've never been trained in how to bring those ideas to fruition, in how to start actioning them, in how to start executing on them. And the first step is to try and make them SMART, those SMART goals. And then we've got a wealth of information already from the active support field about how to develop activity planners, looking at how to help staff prepare people, how to motivate them, looking at very specific interaction styles. Sometimes we need a task analysis. If we're developing a new approach for somebody, our staff clear on the steps that need to be followed to support the delivery of this goal. And then finally, we help candidates create an action plan for how they're going to deliver this and how they're going to monitor it. Now, really important thing I think to say is that on this course, we're not necessarily always looking for something new, for people to develop a new goal. It could be something that someone's already working on. It could be something that just perhaps one member of staff's able to do with that individual. And I go back to the swimming example with my man that I was talking about earlier. There was one member of staff that remembered going swimming with him and was confident about that. So it wasn't a new goal, it was trying to re-establish that and get it happening again. So the Eddie coaching model. So once we've looked at quality of life through the Perma model, once we've established that goal that we're going to work on, we're then going to start focusing on coaching other staff. So the first thing in Roy's Eddie model is explain. Can you provide a written summary of the activity and verbally describe it? Yeah. Or it can be a visual summary, actually, if that's right for people. Video modeling can be a great way of doing it. Second, demonstrate. So to physically demonstrate that activity for others to see. And again, we'll come to kind of why that's important. But for candidates going through this, once they've set that goal, they're going to use that demonstration period to go and test. Is your action plan deliverable? Is it achievable? If you can't deliver it, or people that like that person that are really motivated to support that person can't get it up and running, it's very unlikely we're going to get other members of the team to do it. So we need to test that first. Then do under supervision. So they're going to support another member of the team to engage in that action plan, that specific area of practice under supervision. And again, they will give that kind of feedback, that corrective feedback and that positive feedback to that member. And they will kind of repeat that until that person is kind of competent and confident in being able to do that. And then a lot of you guys might recognize this as behaviour skills training. It's very similar to behaviour skills training. But the final bit that Roy puts in is you have a go. It's the Y on his Eddie model. And that's for staff to go and conduct this independently and then come back and feedback on their experience. Some of you guys might have seen this, you observe a reactivity. When you're in an environment, that person can do that skill. Perhaps when you're not there, it becomes more difficult for them to do, or it doesn't happen in the same way. Again, we need staff's experience of that. And really what this is kind of one of the things that we can link this back to, Clements and Zarkowska talk about verbal presentation will influence verbal behaviour, motor presentation will influence motor behaviour. We want staff to engage in these new practices, these new skills. And supporting them to physically do that and provide that kind of physical feedback is one of the key factors. So we then look at the practice workshop element. So this is about the reviewing aspect. And what we're supporting candidates to do as they go through this course is develop their terms of reference for these practice workshops. Their rhythm of review, if you like, is one of the things that we call it. So the candidates will select that important goal with their team. They'll also be clear about describing those kind of lead measures. What are the things that are going to help us achieve that goal? The next areas that we need to look at, those of you that are familiar with PSR, periodic service review, will know that visual feedback to teams is really powerful and really important to let us know whether we're on track to meet goals or not. And then finally, that rhythm of review. When are you guys going to sit down and discuss this? It's so important. And we see evidence kind of time and time again. Some people call it a cadence of accountability. You know, when are we going to sit down together and be able to discuss the aspects that we're working on together? So we've got organisations or candidates to develop their own terms of reference. So the purpose of these practice workshops is to review the implementation and impact of the action plan and EDI coaching plan. So to have a look at what's happening and to see whether it's working or not, to provide that opportunity to review and get those early warning signs as to whether we're on track or not to achieve things. The team will then set exactly when, where, and how long their practice workshops occur for. So again, you might want to think about, can this fit with existing systems? Can we enhance people's supervisions, perhaps, if you've already got that up and running? Would this be well placed in a staff team meeting? And again, we haven't targeted that in this course, because for some organisations, they may not have team meetings up and running. They may not have supervisions up and running. And that's a completely kind of separate work stream to get those things up and running. So we've made sure there's a discipline in the system that people are going to get together and they're going to talk about these things. The next thing in the terms of reference is who's going to be present. And what we've asked for is that the candidate's going to be there, the second staff member, i.e. the person that they've coached through, the manager of that service. We think it's really key that they understand what's happening and that they're able to help candidates unlock those barriers or any challenges to that. Other staff, and if possible and suitable, forgive me for it not being on here, the person themselves. You know, there may be times when that is completely appropriate and there may be times when it's not. That's down for candidates to describe. And then clarity of what we're going to review in those practice workshops. So what we're really looking at is progress against the action plan, but we're also looking for their experience of kind of coaching other people. One of the things that we know is absent in a lot of services is that kind of quality feedback to each other. We have a dearth of that. There's not enough of it that goes on. So one of the things that we're trying to support candidates to do as they go through is to develop their kind of skills around feedback. So the schedule and review for this course, it takes place over 3 months. So again, we're trying to put in place the learning from previous experiences. We started off with a system-wide integration session, and it's absolutely key that there's strategic alignment, that management are on board with this and that they're ready to provide and allocate candidates the time to engage in the specifics of these practices. It's a fairly invested course, but practice leadership is an invested approach. So we've got those managers on board early and some senior operators within organisations. We've had those discussions around making accommodations for candidates to do this. And also one of the key things that's really important that doesn't happen ahead of many longitudinal courses is, what are you going to take off candidates' hands whilst they're doing this? If this increases their workload, what are you going to take off their hands to help them learn this? You'll all know yourself, when you're learning something new for the first time, it takes a lot of that mental capacity. And even if it does fit into your existing work streams, having something else on your plate feels like a lot more hard work. So we needed to make sure this was manageable for them. We've got 3 workshops essentially over the 3-month period, and they're kind of interspersed with coaching sessions. But for ease of description here, essentially what candidates are going to do is see one. We're going to talk through how to develop that and give some examples. Then they're going to do one. So they're going to develop that EDI, develop the Perma profile, action plan, and coach another member of the staff team through that. and set up the practice workshops and the rhythm of the review. So again, we're seeing changes within the service infrastructure as well as just what we're doing to people and the support that we're providing. And then finally, they're going to teach one. So they are then going to take another member of their team and they will coach that person through developing a Perma profile, developing an action plan for that, and then coaching somebody else. So there's the train the trainer element of it. As mentioned, we've got coaching sessions interspersed with that. So we've got one-to-one sessions booked with candidates that will be going through. They'll be able to kind of, we'll hopefully be able to help use our experience to support those guys to overcome any barriers or to help them avoid any kind of common pitfalls that people do. And then finally, there is a portfolio, final presentation and portfolio submission. So candidates will need to describe the work that they've done and evidence what they've done and talk about their experience of coaching others. So the metrics that we're going to use to evaluate this project, we have a practice leadership survey, which is a 16 item, scaled item used by Julie Beadle-Brown and colleagues to establish whether practice leadership is in place. So one of the things we want to evaluate is, does this improve practice leadership at services? The second thing we're looking at is the Office for National Statistics, personal wellbeing standards. They're a very subjective measure. We know that. But we're just having a go. We're going to see what comes back. We know there's going to be some challenges with that, but still we're going to use it and see what comes back. Within our workbooks for candidates, we have an activity tracker. So we're going to be monitoring the frequency of activities that come out of that Perma profile for people. We're also going to use an approach called experience sampling. And that's really about the experience of candidates that are going through. So we want to understand, for those people that are coaching and that are going on to train, does this make you feel any more confident in any of those aspects? What were your challenges? What were your experiences like? We're going to look at those fidelity measures. As we spoke about, the organisational context is one of those core features of practice leadership. It's highly unlikely this stuff will embed, that it will change perceptions of practice leadership if staff don't see any differences in the service. So we've got those fidelity measures to see if practice workshops are happening and also some quality standards around that. But as mentioned, the teams will be involved in developing their own standards around their practice workshops and henceforth the fidelity measures. And finally, we're going to be looking at a workplace Perma profile. So for the candidates that are going through this, I'm interested in knowing, does better practice leadership lead to improved well-being for people in leadership positions? We think that the kind of setting and achievement of goals is something that can improve the well-being. So as well as looking at outcomes for the individuals we support, we're also interested in what impact that has at the service, but also interested in the impact it's going to have for candidates too. And so I think that leaves reasonable amount of time for any questions. Very rare that I get through those things quickly, but what I hope, one of the things that we hope is that we can make friends with that elephant in the room, and that kind of practice leadership no longer becomes that elephant in the room, and that this project might help us understand how to develop practice leadership in services that narrows that gap between policy and practice, and that sees a change in the way that we try and apply training within organisations to stop the kind of waste of money that's occurred. There are big amounts of money invested in training and often little evidence that's making a difference for people. So what we hope is that with a little bit of thought and a little bit of planning around the development of training programs, that we might be able to see some changes and some better value for money for that. But most importantly, that it makes a difference for the people we support. So as mentioned, work in progress. We will hopefully be sharing the evaluation with people once it's done and once Roy's done his thing. But guys, thanks for listening to me. It's a weird experience doing this when I can't see people's faces. If there is any questions, then I'd be really happy to have a go at answering them. So Thanks very much. And people got my email address. If you want to ask me any questions outside of this, it's there, and I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, you have already got a couple of questions, Pads. So a couple that came up as we went along. You mentioned about practice leader not always being a particularly helpful title. What would you suggest as a replacement?
It's a good question. I think I'll do this in a roundabout way, forgive me, as I often do. I think it depends on the organisation and it depends on your service. So for me, I think that really what we're looking to do is develop cultures of practice leadership. And, my experience as a support worker working in services, there were a range of people that could lead on very specific aspects of practice with specific individuals. They were great at the morning routine, or they were brilliant at supporting that person to cook, or whatever it was. So I think that some of these kind of skills around facilitating practice leadership, I would like to see in the kind of supervisory staff's role. So perhaps team leaders in services, I think for managers, key workers, and I think that I'd go back to considerations about your individual system. Who do you want supporting staff to engage in the right practices with people? So I think that practice leadership should fall into people's job roles rather than we specifically allocate someone as a practice leader. But for the purposes of training, I think it can be useful to focus practice leadership training on individual people. I hope that makes sense.
It certainly does to me. Yeah. No, I do agree. I suppose the one thing that I'd add is that the only kind of slight addition to that, I think, is sometimes people having the sort of authority or status to be leading practice, because I completely agree about key workers, but it's something that I've kind of seen in the past where the person's the key working, they're doing their bit, no one's paying the blindest bit of attention to them.
It's a really great point, Hugh, and I think for anybody on here that's really interested in these aspects around leadership, I just can't speak highly enough of Michael West's research and the King's Fund. If you Google the King's Fund leadership, you'll be able to access all that for free, as well as his really good book that he's written too. But and these models of collective leadership, I think, are really key. So your point, Hugh, about having the authority or autonomy to do, I think that's the next call for our more senior leaders in these fields, is to support that within services, is to provide a structure where it's those that are engaging in the right practices that we're listening to, not necessarily those with the title, if that makes sense. But that's a longer term journey, I think. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and we do need people that have that are able to kind of push decisions through, I think, to help get this stuff started. Yeah.
Great stuff. And that kind of leads on quite nicely to the next question, which is, what advice would you give to someone who isn't confident in influencing PBS up, but is okay with doing it with staff teams and others?
First thing I'd say is keep doing what you're doing, because that's really important. And I've only ever been on one leadership training for myself, right? One organisation sent me on a leadership training. I'll stop there. I was going to say something I shouldn't. And one of the bits that I took away from it that was really helpful was to stop focusing too much on your quote unquote weaknesses. You're at where you're at because you're clearly good at something. And if that's one of the things that whoever asked that question, if you're good at that, you keep doing that, make sure that you get that sense of accomplishment and achievement, because that's really important. And some people can't do that. I would then say, I think that you're probably going to need support of a good leader to help you figure out how to work up the ladder, if you like. And there are some really interesting kind of approaches in terms of, if you kind of Google managing up and across, there are a fair few books on on those kind of practices. And I think one of the things for me that made me more effective in organisations at working with my managers was to understand their value system and their language, and to try and fold in the things that I was saying that were important. How is that going to make a difference to them and their objectives? So if this is about your service manager or a regional manager or above, sometimes it's about being able to figure out how your the things that are important to you can help them. So yeah, answer, don't stop doing what you're doing, and try and get some support from somebody in your organisation or someone external. Get some supervision from someone that's confident in that, and get some kind of coaching to try and help you through that.
Great stuff. Okay, we have got a few more questions coming through, Pads. The first one, I think, was about periodic service review. So in terms of experience using PSR, I've just lost my chat. Bear with me a second.
Oh, sorry, Hugh.
That's all right. What kind of measures do you feel are effective and work well with different levels of staff team?
Say that again, sorry, Hugh.
So what they're asking essentially is about, within periodic service review, what types of measures do you feel are effective and work well with different levels of staff?
Good question. What kind of measures are effective? Ones that the team have been involved in setting, I think, is my quick answer to that. There are, and forgive me for not being very behavioural analytic on this, but those of you know me, that I am sometimes and I'm not at other times, right? It is what it is. The concept of managing up and managing down, you know, I don't think it's all good, all bad in either direction. Sometimes bottom-up approaches are slower, and actually sometimes during a time of crisis, those top-down approaches can be helpful because they're speedy. So some of that relates to context, I think. And if this is about trying to establish culture within staff teams, then they have to be involved in the setting of those standards. We're all much more likely to engage in practices that we've been involved in establishing and agreeing. So I think that's one of the key things. Involve people that it's going to affect. That's absolutely key. I think less is more. I think the massive mistakes I see with PSR or any other standards is that there's way too many of them, and it becomes a real administrative burden. Sometimes deciding what one thing you're going to work on and doing that well is motivating for a team, because you start to see progress. And when a team starts to see progress, they buy into that process more. So when you're doing those approaches, not everybody might get their kind of the bit that they want worked on at that period in time. But by clearly establishing what it is you're going to work on, focusing on it and getting that happening, you can then move to the next and the next. And I think that's really motivating for staff teams. So if it's about culture, I think engaging those folks is absolutely key.
Great stuff. Okay, we've still got a few more. The next one that's come up, I suppose, is kind of talking somewhat about what you were meaning in terms of the distinction between managerial skills and leadership skills. Because what they've asked is, how can someone who is good at the managing element improve their leadership skills?
Yeah, great. Good question. I think there's a few different approaches. I think number one, as someone that has managed teams in the past, and is learn to be a student again. You know, let yourself do that. Sometimes if you're a good manager, some of us have been control freaks in the past. We need to learn to let go of that. And I would say the very principle of practice leadership, be around people that you think are good leaders. Watch them, ask them questions about how they do what they do. And then I would say, give yourself manageable practice. So set yourself a SMART goal about an aspect that you want to get better at. Make it manageable and be kind to yourself. Let yourself learn that. And one of the tips, I think, is that sometimes it's a bit over glorified. Get a team on board, and I don't think there's anything that can get a team on board more than, and especially if you're a good manager, listening to people and taking action on it. That's a great way of getting the buy-in of people. So I think the easy way there is try and spend time with other people you think are good leaders. Observe what they do, ask questions, and then edit it. Decide what you're going to do, explain it, demonstrate it, do under supervision, and ask somebody to feed back on you. But I'd also like to say to whoever that person is good on you for asking the question. I think it's brave, because sometimes when we're good at something, we don't want to admit the bits that we're not so good on. So good on you. I bet you're already well on the path. I bet you're already a better leader than you think you are, if I'm being honest.
Okay, good stuff. There's more questions coming in, so we probably will have to draw things to a close reasonably soon. But the next one I think is important because it's something that comes up regularly, which is, what would you suggest when working with resistant staff?
It's a great question. I think we might have something on our website actually about this. I think I did one about garnering support last year. I think the first thing I would say is try and understand where that resistance is coming from. I think that's the first thing to say. I'm a positive behaviour support guy, aren't I? We take function-based approaches. For me, it's really important to understand where that resistance is coming from. And it could be a whole host of things. I think a lot of staff teams are sick of feeling like they're done to. So another thing that they're told to do, sometimes there's just an automatic pushback from people. So number one is try and understand where that resistance is coming from. Speak to that person, and again, this might be something that you want to get some support from colleagues on, is kind of, when I say calling it out, I don't mean, to get into an argument, but just to recognize it and say, look, I can tell there's kind of resistance here. Is it you don't like what's being asked? You don't understand? You've seen it happen before and it's not worked. So to try and understand that and have those conversations with people, and sometimes knowing that it doesn't matter what you do, there's going to be resistance, and my response to that is, I shouldn't swear on something that's being recorded, but don't let the buggers bring you down. There's always going to be a dissenting voice in a team that I find, and that used to occupy a lot of my headspace. If they're the outlier, it's still important to try and work with them, but actually, if you've got the majority of people coming on board or having conversations, don't lose all your time on that outlier. So try and understand it, and then develop your plan working backwards from there. And as I say, I think we've got a presentation on there that person can find a bit more of an expanded answer for.
Yeah, and I just kind of echo that, I think, Paddy. I think sometimes it's that sort of empathy with staff, in terms of what my kind of experience of this is, that sometimes staff, PBS is the newest of a long succession of things this organisation is adopting and implementing. And after every single one, nothing's changed, or it's gone away within 6 to 12 months. And that's often disheartening for staff, particularly if, again, it's come up in previous presentations, the fact that most people aren't in this work for the money. That's not why they started it. So you've got to kind of start with the assumption that people probably, at least at some stage, wanted to do a good job. Yeah. But the reality of kind of that sort of setting people up and then things not kind of going ahead, I think it's very disheartening for staff. So sometimes I think it's a simple matter of persistence. Persistence, role modeling, showing them that this isn't going away, maintaining that enthusiasm, because eventually people kind of will come on board. And that goes hand in hand with what Paddy was saying about kind of not focusing just on the people who aren't on board, focus on everyone else. When other people see it working and see it start to change, they will come.
Hugh, it's a great point, and you just remind me of kind of one other piece on that. I think that really, in the spirit of practice leadership, is to demonstrate, the example that I gave earlier about the young lad that have been kind of seen as a bit of an ogre, if you like, was to get in and spend some time with him, And again, knowing that, having seen that when demands were placed on him, that was one of the things that was leading to incidents. So just getting in alongside, spending time with him with items that he really liked and enjoyed. And again, I didn't want to get hit or any of that kind of stuff, but when staff see the change and see that you've been involved with it, that can be a way of bringing people on board. So I think that, and forgive the term, but I learned it from someone in sales, but I think it applies to our work and trying to get other people on board. We need to try and create a buying environment and not a selling environment. If we're constantly telling people what to do and this is going to make things better and that will do, sometimes people need to see it. They need to see how that's going to make things better for them, because we've all been let down by people that have promised us loads of stuff, right, and have not delivered. And I think that's happened in services a lot. So yeah, those are some of the things.
Great stuff. There's a few kind of comments from people. So someone's flagged up the taking other responsibilities off staff's hands or off their plate. Someone just mentioned that's a good point. I wholeheartedly agree. You know, very few people within education, social care, etc. at the moment are just sitting around twiddling their thumbs going, oh, I could do a bit of practice leadership, but I'd rather not. You know, so yeah, that's been highlighted.
Good.
And the other one that's come up is the kind of cost effectiveness. Is often something that's very attractive in terms of commissioners and senior management. I'd agree that people want to see outcomes, but they also have limited budgets. So yeah, being able to display that is good. But there's one more question, which is just relating to qualifications. So what qualifications would you advise to for a practice leader to hold or gain, I suppose, if they were going to seek a qualification? And the person's acknowledged that, you know, that qualifications aren't everything, but people do look at them and value them.
I can see that's Steve that's answered that. Hi, Steve. And it's a great question. How long have we got? Genuinely, how long have we got? Are we supposed to be finished now? Have we got?
Oh yeah, we've got -7 minutes, Paddy.
Great. Oh well, good. If you guys are all happy, I'm happy. On those aspects around practice leadership, there's nothing that says you need any qualifications whatsoever. And I think that, and just like Steve had said, there are people out there that are great at it and are perhaps not confident, and that's something we need to be really aware of in our field, that we don't lose good people through kind of demanding certain qualifications. So to give a bit more of a tangible answer, I think that organisations can support people by developing better policies, that organisational context, by the way that we recognise and reward staff. And I don't necessarily mean about pay structures. Pay is important, but I don't necessarily mean that. I mean the time that we invest into people, the supervision structures, that exactly like I said, taking things off their hands. I think that sometimes what we see is people that are really good at that, but they're asked to do it alongside being a deputy manager or alongside being a manager. And I think that that's really, really difficult to do. Any of you deputy managers, team leaders, even support workers, trying to find time outside of what's right in front of you is difficult. So I think rather than the worry about qualifications, I think we need to develop change within organisations to facilitate people to do that better. And I think that will help people with their confidence in that area. And everybody's different. For some people, going away on a course, learning, coming back will give them the confidence to do it. For some people, actually having the experience of doing it and then going to do the course is the better way around of doing it. So I actually think this, rather than consideration about qualifications, I think it comes back to kind of organisational policies, strategies, and what we do in work, and how we support people in those roles, and yeah, so job descriptions and the like. So we see plenty of qualified people out there that can't do this stuff, right? Plenty of qualified people out there that can't do it. So I'm shying away from some of that stuff now and looking at that. And then perhaps some nuanced training for people. You know, sometimes it's public speaking that terrifies people. Sometimes it's people might struggle with dyslexia, and that makes them not confident in terms of writing things. So I think it's a little bit more nuanced in terms of the personal development plans for those people, I think. But Steve, I know you and I know what you're doing, and I think the kind of support that you provide to people in that role is one of the things that's going to be really key in developing their confidence to go and do this. And as a new parent, I've learned about this concept of good enough parenting. And my goodness, I'm so glad I found that. I'm so glad I found it, because it's taken the pressure off and it's helping me to really enjoy my experience of being a parent for the first time. And as any of you guys that got kids know, it's tricky. You know, there's some tricky aspects to it, just like there's tricky aspects to trying to do practice leadership in a team. You need to be a good enough leader. And when I think back at the people that have really helped me develop, some of the academic stuff's been really helpful, you know, some of it has, but the people that have really helped me are the people that took time to support me on that journey and made me feel important and helped me learn about how to approach my mistakes. So I think sometimes we can over-engineer the solutions to support people with those roles, and being a good human being, those good human skills. And I just see my good friend Mark Humphreys, time, patience, and a no-blame culture. He's absolutely right. Absolutely right. Let people grow into their roles. This is difficult work. It's difficult work. Yeah.
Great stuff. And we have overrun slightly. I don't think we've got any kind of active questions, so we can draw things to a close. But one thing which has come up, just the recordings from sessions, how are we making those accessible, Paddy?
I think, Hugh, as everybody knows, I'm just the jazz hands of PBS UK. It's Tia Martin that makes everything work, and Hannah and Hugh and the rest of the guys. I believe that we will be putting them on the website. I believe we'll be hosting them on the website. In terms of people having access to the slides and that kind of stuff, I think we're fine with that. That's absolutely fine. I don't know if we'll send them out, or again, we might send a Dropbox link to people so they can download things. But we are happy for the slides to be shared and that kind of stuff. So yeah. And people saying congratulations to me. Look, that's really lovely of you guys. Thank you so much. I'm thinking that's referencing the baby, little Finn. So yeah, thank you very much.
Great stuff. Okay, we're 15 minutes over, so we should draw things to a close there. Thank you very much to everyone who's attended. That was another great session, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, guys.